Washington football. Woo! Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Burgundy Zone. I am your host, Kyle. I will not be joined by my co-host this evening. Reed is at work, as usual, working hard as his usual self. And Hall just actually had his baby on Tuesday morning, a little pretty baby girl. So he will not be joining me for this episode, but, congratulations to the Hall family. I know they're very happy and excited to be able to do it. I asked him if he cried, and he said no. I don't honestly believe him. But that being said, the Burgundy Zone is a part of the Frederick Podcast Network. You can find out more by going to www.listenfrederick.com. And we thought we'd bring in a very good friend of this show, big man himself, Mr. Mitch Tischler of Monumental Sports. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Mitch. How you doing?
I'm doing great. How are you? And big congrats to Hall, bud. It's a big day.
Absolutely, man. I asked him, I was like, how weird was it when you first held her? He was like, dude, it's crazy. Like, it really is, creating life. It's this whole nother aspect. But that being said, and that topic, the title of this episode is the bye-week briefing, Mitch. So to kind of, I want to ask you about the stadium deal, but let's not get into that just yet. But after this bye week, Lattimore is going to be added into the equation. And one of the best questions you can ask anybody is, what is the secondary going to look like once Lattimore is added into that room? So what is your opinion on that?
So to be honest, I don't know that anyone can say exactly what they think it's going to look like. Last week, Joe Witt said that Lattimore hadn't even started doing team drills with him yet. So as far as figuring out how all the pieces are going to work together, I have no doubt that they'll figure it out. And when they come out of the bye and play New Orleans, I think that might be a little bit of a big game for our guy.
Yeah.
So I think he'll be excited. But if I was to guess the way that's going to look, I think you're going to have Lattimore on one side. You'll have Mikey Sainers still on the outside on the other. And then interior, you're going to have a lot of Noah Igbenogany. And, that doesn't mean that BSJ won't still get some run here and there. I think he'll still get, 10, 15 plays a game. And certainly teams go four wide enough that and Commanders will have to counter with, some sort of dime or nickel look with some extra DBs out there. So I think basically it's going to look very similar to what we've seen. It'll just be a Marshawn Lattimore replacing Benjamin St-Juste for the majority of plays.
Yeah, I would totally get it if they went down that route. But staying on topic with this, we were talking in our Discord with the injuries that happened with Austin Eckler and everything of the sort, where Washington was like a rock and a hard place with a lot of their injury designations and who could be brought up and who couldn't based on how many times they brought them up from the practice squad. But Emanuel Forbes is a person I brought up saying, could he possibly be let go for this particular reason? I'm not going to say shocked, but was that a kind of a surprising moment for you when they released Emanuel Forbes?
Surprising, yes, just in the timing, but whether he was on the roster and inactive every week or just flat out cut, at the end of the day, you're getting the same thing either way. You can look at the snap counts for Forbes. It was going down as the season was going, and then ultimately he was inactive, the past, whatever it was, 3 or 4 straight weeks. And quite frankly, when he's out on the field, you're playing 11 versus 10 in the run. And we know how important it is for Joe Witt and Dan Quinn and this defensive group, for these guys to show their effort and, stick their noses in there. And Forbes did from time to time, but also from time to time, he showed some lack of interest in being physical. And quite frankly, as an NFL corner, you're not going to get away without being physical. So, it'll be interesting to see how he develops as he goes, elsewhere in his journey. But, what I do like about this coaching staff is that, and we saw it early on in camp with like Dax Milne when they got rid of him, when they kind of identify that a guy can't help you, it doesn't just languish on the roster. They try and, find a way to bring somebody else who may be able to help more. And obviously, if you're doing the Marshawn Lattimore for Emanuel Forbes directly, you brought in a much more accomplished player. But even when they bring in, the Sheldon Days of the world and, the Jalen Holmes, the guys who are, stepping in for Fedarian Mathis, they're looking for what's working with this group. They're not just satisfied with this is our roster and we're going to go forward with it. So it's unfortunate, but, at the end of the day, I think all of us who have watched Emanuel Forbes play as much as he has kind of knew what kind of player he was and what was coming.
Yeah, which is it just sucks because he got the interception right before the trade deadline, and unfortunately that just didn't garner enough interest around the league. And I think the writing was on the wall. Which best of luck to Emanuel Forbes. It's just unfortunate where he was drafted at what round and the kind of pressure that created on him. But I asked Hall and Reed if they want to submit questions for you in order for you to answer, and Hall asked one. He said, "Ask Mitch, does he see a path to the Commanders getting to the sixth seed, or does he think they stay locked in at the seventh seed if they make the playoffs?"
So I do. I think most likely they end up sticking at 7. Quite frankly, I'll be surprised if they don't make the playoffs. They have the 4 games they have left. There are winnable games in there. If they get to 10 wins, they should be in. Especially with the gap they have between the teams that are kind of chasing them. I think what's interesting is the Vikings are sitting at what are they? They're 9-4 right now, I believe.
Yes, I believe so.
And they end the season with who is it? It's Falcons, Bears, um, Lions, Packers, and Seahawks. So they
Okay.
have 5 games against the Bears, maybe not as much, but they have 4 of the 5 games are against teams that are fighting for playoff spots and trying to get into. And so I do think that the Commanders can squeak out 3-1 down the stretch. You end up there at 11-6. If the Vikings go 1-4, they're also at 11-6. Then we can start playing the game of conference records and all that stuff, which the Commanders should. I'd be surprised if they don't have it better since most of their losses are to AFC teams. But ultimately, I think they're probably going to be at 7. They're probably going to play the Eagles in the first round of the playoffs, and they had 1 point game with 10 minutes left in that game up in Philly. They have another shot at them in 3 weeks, I guess, from now. So, anything can happen once you get in the playoffs.
Yep, and being able to see a familiar opponent like that in the playoffs is going to just create so much attention, and I really hope that does come down to the case. And but you brought up the Bears, and the Bears obviously they're somehow retaining Ryan Poles, which is insane to me, just given with how everything has panned out there. But they have speculated that Cliff Kingsbury could be targeted by them to be their new head coach. Do you think that, in my opinion, I don't think Cliff would be interested in that with what he has cooking here. Obviously, there's only so many amount of jobs in this league in that regard, but it's almost like Cliff is resigned with what he has.
The irony of the team that decided to tell Cliff that he was running a college offense, and that the fan base all wanted to talk about how much better the Chicago situation was
Right.
than Washington. Everything. I quite frankly, I don't see it happening. I don't know that Cliff is necessarily ready to jump back into a head coaching role. I'm not saying I don't know one way or the other. But he's also still being paid by Arizona, I think through 26, if I'm not mistaken. So he's got 2 more seasons after this where he's getting head coach money. So it's not like he's hurting for money, because basically what the Commanders pay him offset
Right.
what the Cardinals have to pay him
Basically,
ultimately.
basically getting paid like a head coach.
Right, he's basically getting paid like a head coach. He has a relationship with Caleb Williams. I mean, I got to be honest. This is just my instinct or my gut, whatever you want to say. I don't think he takes head coaching job interviews this offseason. He's been there, done that. He doesn't have to practice. I don't think he needs to practice to go through the process. And I think that, there might be a refreshing piece of only having to concentrate on the offense, and the fact that you have obviously Jayden Daniels and have done all the things that you were able to do with him this year. You might want to build on it. So my gut says that he's not going to take that, but the irony that I would fall off my chair laughing if he ends up in Chicago and those fans embrace him, because that thing will last 6 weeks before they're calling for him to be fired.
Yeah, in the offseason, they were saying this is the best case scenario for a rookie quarterback to walk into. Offensive coordinator canned, and then the head coach canned before the season is already over, which is
Let me tell you,
laughable.
that's not going to be the last head coach that Caleb Williams gets fired.
Dude, you're not lying, dude. And that's the one thing
No.
I've been bringing up is, do you really feel comfortable with attaching yourself to that situation? Who is ownership gonna attach themselves to? And that ultimately is the big question. Is Caleb going to be bad enough to be able to warrant a top 3, 5 pick to be able to replace
No.
him? Right?
Caleb's a good football player. Don't get
Yeah.
me wrong. He just makes really, really bad decisions at key moments. And I've said it from, the preseason and until now. There's a lot of style over substance with Caleb, in that, You'll see on ESPN and NFL Network and all these different places these crazy plays where he's running around for 10 seconds behind the line of scrimmage, finds a receiver, 50 yards downfield and makes a big play. Those are great, but if you can't connect on a hitch on first and 10 and get yourself to 2nd and 5 and then throw an out to get yourself to 3rd and 2, you're going to have trouble succeeding. And all during the preseason, you would see these crazy plays by Caleb, but it would be 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out, crazy play, touchdown, 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. Now, he's certainly improving as this season is going, but some of his decision making at the end of football games has been beyond baffling, because as much as you want to try and blame the coaches about what's happening, ultimately as the quarterback on the field, you have to bear some responsibility for it, and no pun intended. And I don't know that he does such a great job of that. So I'm so happy the Commanders ended up with Jayden. I've been very high on Jayden. I was not as high on Caleb, and it's good to see it come into fruition a little bit.
Yeah, I think Bill Belichick echoed exactly what my thoughts on the matter, and talking about how Caleb Williams' inaccuracy is one of the things his biggest drawbacks as projecting as a pro. But you being off offensive line aficionado, loving what the big boys do up there, a lot like Reed on the weekends. But my question to you is, what was, because in my opinion, I think the offensive line and how they executed against Tennessee was vastly different than what happened against Dallas. Do you feel the same way? Like, what was ultimately the big difference between the output against Dallas and Tennessee?
I think a big part is having Cornelius Lucas at right tackle.
Okay.
Trent Scott is the fourth tackle on this team, and it's not Trent Scott's fault. Like, any team that's dealing with their fourth string tackle is going to struggle. Cornelius Lucas gives you a lot more than Trent does, and I think materially the offense had to change when Trent Scott was out there, because they had to send that much more help to the outside and not run bootlegs that direction, because they were concerned about free rushers and whatnot. And I think Trent Scott is a good player to have on the roster, because I think as a fourth tackle, he's fine if he's in as your sixth offensive lineman,
Right.
But as your starting right tackle, or the right tackle that's playing a lot of snaps, I think it's troublesome. But ultimately, I think it was almost, a confluence of a bunch of different things. I think the offensive line is starting to get a little bit healthier. Clearly, this bye week is much needed, and I think they'll start, going in that direction. As well, I think Tennessee had a very poor defensive plan for how to handle the Commanders' offense. And then thirdly, we've seen Jayden get healthier and healthier week after week after that. When you start seeing him running those draws up the middle and not turtling as he kind of gets into the holes and kind of trying to hit them hard, that changes the way a defense has to defend you, and changes the way that defensive linemen are going to react to certain fakes and stuff. So I don't think it was any one thing. That interior, that Tennessee Titans defensive line is very good. They just had a very bad day, and they didn't really make many adjustments as the day went on.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think I saw a clip today from Brownlee, who is in their secondary, saying that he thinks the cold really affected them, which, like, it's kind of insane to me, because it's not like Tennessee's that far away from here to where the weather is drastically different. It's not like Miami, so to speak. You know what I mean? So, I mean, maybe that was just excuses on the day of, but I questioned that one. But to wrap this up, I only have a couple more questions for you, Mitch.
Hold on, real quick. The cold weather thing is total and utter shenanigans. I don't know whether you guys curse or not here, but listen, playing in cold weather is tough. Don't get me wrong, but if you're not the quarterback and you're complaining and playing the game in Buffalo with the snow and all that stuff, different ball game. Tyreek Hill was great in Kansas City for years. The weather's pretty cold there.
Yeah,
All of a
true.
sudden he gets to Miami and he can't play in cold weather again. I think when you look at Tua, his career, maybe he didn't play a lot of cold weather games. Jayden hasn't played a ton of cold weather games, but for an offensive lineman, defensive lineman, receiver / secondary players, saying that it materially affects the way that they play. And let's be honest, the weather was 40 degrees, 45 degrees. It's not like it was bitter cold, wind blowing, right, precipitation coming down. I mean, that's high on the level of excuses. And I don't know if you're Ari Gold fan, but that's a get the F out of here with that. I would, if a player on a team that I was either on or coaching or covered or whatever tried to drop that on me, that player would be running suicides until the sun came up.
Well, and to his point, 'cause I will say this, in a couple of the turkey bowls I played in, I would come in with extra layers, And like by the, I guess like 10 minutes in, I'd be taking them off because you're running around so much. You're already generating that heat where you don't need those layers. You're almost overheating yourself. And so with them, with Washington dominating the time of possession with like 40 minutes, I could see why that defense, when they finally got on the field, they're just kind of like stiff almost. But not look, that's just an excuse I think that they try to find in this game. I think Washington just came out and punched them in the mouth, and they played like the cold wasn't a thing, which is probably a reason why they won the game.
It wasn't cold.
No,
That's what I'm making. It wasn't even cold for that game, but I guess I'll get off my high horse on the weather there.
no, like a negative 20 degrees type stuff where people have played in. I'm sure they're looking at that saying that's ridiculous, because
Right.
there's people out there who've done it, and it's like the Ice Bowl. I mean, back in the old days, and it's
Sure, and
insane.
the game in Kansas City last year, the playoff game with the Dolphins, like that's a different ball game. Like you
Right.
can complain about the weather and not play well, with that going on, but it was 40, 45 degrees. There was no wind, no rain, no snow, nothing. That's
The sun definitely helps, Mitch. But the
yeah.
question I have for you is the like Pro Bowlers for this team. Is there anybody who's on this team that you could certifiably say should be getting the votes of the fan base to be making the Pro Bowl?
Lupo and Wagner, I think, are two definitely that need to be. Hold on, let me start. Jayden Daniels, number one. He's not the best quarterback in the NFC, but the fans have shown up all season long that Pepsi Offensive Rookie of the Week is a fan voted metric, and we've seen how many Jayden Daniels has won. I think he's one away from setting the record for winning the most in a single season for a rookie. I'm not surprised to see him, ranked pretty highly there, but I think Frankie Louvu, Bobby Wagner are two guys that absolutely need to be there. I think Terry McLaurin definitely needs to be there. I think this offensive line has played well enough that they deserve to have a representative. And I think Sam Cosmi has played through a bunch of injuries, but I think early in the season, I said that I thought Sam Cosmi might even get all pro this season.
Yeah.
Not necessarily that his play has been the best right tackle in the NFL, or right guard in the NFL, but more so that, he's been a very good player for a while. These all pro, Pro Bowl voting things are usually a year removed, staggered from, a player plays really well last year, they get voted to the Pro Bowl this year. When an offense goes from being 31st in the NFL
Yep.
to top 10, top 15, you're going to see some guys get some accolades. So I would throw my hat in the ring for Sam Cosmi for Pro Bowl and even potentially All Pro.
Absolutely agree with you, man. And badass himself, really coming in and solidifying that offensive line next to Cosme. I know there's a fresh breath of air for him. But one of the surprising things that we've seen thus far is I wasn't expecting fighter jets to be in the equation for Washington to get back into D.C. So, regardless of that, with Maryland requesting it because they lost their A-10 squadron, but that being said, the likelihood now of Washington getting back to RFK in that area, it seems much higher at this point. Is that what you expect?
Certainly, it's going in that direction. I think folks are set on the fact that if DC gets control of the land, then the Commanders will play at RFK's site. And I don't think it's quite that straightforward because I think there's a little more nuance to it. I think the first thing you have to
Usually
look
is.
at is the state of Maryland has $400 million on the table for the Commanders to build a new stadium and work on the infrastructure around their stadium. Does DC have that money? Is DC willing to tool it out? I think the ownership group has, without saying it, made it very clear that they want to be at RFK. Are they willing to build that stadium with their own money? Are they waiting for? Are they going to? Do they need a government handouts for it? You know, what control of the land are they going to have? Are they only going to be able to build the stadium? Can they build a practice facility there? What else can they do? I think there's a lot of questions, and then you also have to look at the other professional sports teams in town. And I think there's a world where they can all work together and make something happen. But we've already heard about the Wizards wanting to have a piece of that for their practice facility. The Spirit have talked about wanting to play in a bigger potentially play in a bigger stadium when they need it. Audi Field is obviously super nice, but maybe for big time events. How is everyone going to play together? And then ultimately it comes down to Muriel Bowser can want this team to play at RFK, and the fans can want it all they want. But as you know, everything comes down to the almighty dollar. So
Yep.
I think it needs to get to the point where that's the issue. But I think the foregone conclusion that if they trade the squadron, the airplanes for the land, that automatically that means that they'll be there. I think is a little ahead of a little ahead of itself.
And damn, Mitch, you had to bring me back down to earth because I was
I'm
feeling,
sorry.
I was feeling hot and heavy.
I'm surprised that I like everyone wants it to happen, and when everyone wants something to happen, usually it does. But that's a big old hunk of money. That's a lot of money that the team has to be willing to spend. That's going to be a $1.5 billion stadium, $2 billion stadium. Are they willing to finance that themselves? Do they love the history of RFK and the aura of being there that much that they're willing to eschew, the 400 mil that Maryland has on the table? I think it's a fair question to ask. And, when next time we have an opportunity to talk to the ownership group, I think that's, top of the list for me is how willing are you to build a stadium with your own money? And is the RFK site dependent on the state, the district coming through with, some funds to help you?
My man, last question I have for you because
Let me
this
also
is
real quick. It should be at RFK. There's a
oh, absolutely.
1,000,000,000% it should be at RFK. Everyone needs to get on the same page and make it happen because that's where it needs to be.
I absolutely agree with you. Last one I have for you. You've done these press conferences, being able to talk with these guys, maybe on a personal level, maybe not. But if the Washington does make the playoffs, should Dan Quinn win Coach of the Year?
Coach of the like we talked about with All Pro and Pro Bowl, a lot of that comes with you get it staggered. It's usually kind of your team is building up to it, and it's 1 year off. I'll tell you what, he deserves it over Sean Payton. I mean,
Yeah,
if you put those two together, and those are the two that you're comparing because they both have the rookie quarterbacks, I think Jayden is had a better season, and B, Dan Quinn came in with a much worse roster and did so much more with it. He should be very heavily in consideration. That being said, if it ends up going to Dan Campbell, it's hard to argue that they might be the best team they might be the best team in football. If it ends up going to some of these other guys, you can understand the teams that are materially better than the Commanders, but Dan Quinn has done more with less. It's like the old school MVP conversation.
yeah,
Do
exactly.
you give it to is it the most valuable player, or do you give it to the best player? Because
Right.
I think Dan Quinn has been the most valuable coach to his team this year.
Absolutely and wholeheartedly agree with you. Just given the whole political aspect of what he walked into in such a short amount of time, being able to do something that not many, I mean, a lot of people projected this team to only win 5 or 6 games. For them to make the playoffs the first year, that's saying something a lot. And I
Absolutely.
feel like that's one thing that's never taken into consideration, especially for these type of awards. But Mitch, I
Well,
know you got somewhere to go. I really appreciate your time as always. I don't want to keep you too late. I know you got to get going. I know traffic and way that everything is. But before you get out of here, just like to plug your social media handle and your show, brother.
yeah, come watch Beltway football on Monumental Sports on TV, on the internet, on monumentalsportsnetwork.com, and follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Mitch_Tischler.
My man, Mitch, go and enjoy your evening, sir, and stay warm.
Thanks so much for having me, bud.
Appreciate you, man. Have a good one. All
You
right,
too.
everybody. We just spoke with a man, Mr. Mitch Tischler. I always appreciate Mitch's time, dude. He's so good at being able to break things down. I think the Dan Quinn thing was he probably I agree with him in what Dan Quinn that should be in heavily in the conversation. I think Kevin O'Connell is another guy with the Vikings. He's done a phenomenal job with what has been going down up there in Minnesota. Like I poo-pooed them or before the season, thinking that they weren't even going to be in the conversation of being a contending team. I thought they were more so going to be in the top 10 in the first round picking, and they just blew the doors off everybody into this league with Sam Darnold. Obviously, they've come back down to earth a little bit, but my goodness, I think Kevin O'Connell's another guy you got to give a lot of credit to. But by far, given the whole aspect of everything, I think Dan Quinn heavily should be considered into that. And then the offensive rookie of the year thing. Look, obviously, on a player basis, and like with Dan Quinn, you want them to win those awards for themselves because they represent your team. You want your team represented with awards. You want that for the guy who came in here and really did some amazing things, which both Jayden Daniels and Dan Quinn have done. My only point being is we've seen before having an offensive rookie of the year and getting to the playoffs and losing. That's awesome that you had that for that 1 year, but the continuation of team success is all, in my opinion, the most important aspect of this because everyone wants to correlate this back to that RG3 argument. I'm much more so invested in making sure that this is a really a stamp on to say this is an entirely new book This is a separate book made by a different author, and we have to take it with that. And that's why I really want the team success much more than anything. If Bo Nix wants to, if they want to give it to Bo Nix, go right ahead. Like, we already know that who we have here, and it's something special that's building. And so we'll take the Offensive Rookie of the Year for a Super Bowl championship at some point. And that's all I'm really invested into and finding out. And I would love to be able to actually have that and have that in my hands. Now, the first question that we have, this one was submitted on Twitter by our guy Tony Franchise, who always appreciate, always takes time to submit questions for us. His question is, normally this time of year we are looking at the draft. It feels good not to, but here's a draft question. With the injuries that have plagued our running backs this year, should we be targeting one in this upcoming draft? Yes. And I'm not saying like a high value first, second rounder type guy. I'm much more so looking at it as saying you need to add to the room. Obviously, they've done a very good job in Adam Peters, Dan Quinn, and company coming together and bringing in very good players with the right mindset. When Austin Eckler came into this, Tony, he spoke saying, I didn't want to be the number one guy, right? I wanted to help the number one running back and being able to make this a great tandem, right? He came in with the right mindset. Bringing a guy like Jeremy McNichols, who's gone from multiple teams, coming here and taking the advantage of the situation when the ball was given to him. Then Chris Rodriguez, who this past week did a fantastic job, rushed for over 5 yards per carry, nearly 100 yards and a touchdown, just given him the sample size that he does have. I think it is important to get one in this upcoming draft simply for a guy like Anthony Lynn, who he can develop from the start. You know, Anthony Lynn this year was handed essentially grown trees already. Like, here you go, that's what you got. Whereas in the draft, you're coming to him saying, here's a bunch of different avenues you can go down, different seeds for trees. Which one do you want? And that way he can plant it, grow it, and we can actually see it blossom. And that's what I'm really looking forward to if that is the case. And I think that should be. And I think the injuries are obviously a big situation here that you have to monitor and you have to take seriously. Because it sucks about Austin Eckler. We have a question submitted by Andy Lockhart that we're going to get to later on that talks about Austin Eckler and the side effects that he had from his concussion this past 2 weeks ago. And we're going to get into that, and it's devastating. I really do feel for Austin Eckler because that is just absolutely brutal. And I really hope that it is at RFK. I've said it from the get-go. You go big or you go home. And Washington has to get back to RFK. For me personally, I am all about views. I'll continue to talk about when I went up to Penn State for work and I got lost. I was driving around the highway and I came up over this one bridge. I think it was a bridge or a hill, and I see up on the hill huge lights on a stadium, and it was just a random hill, grass all up on it, just a big mound, huge hill with just a stadium sitting on top and lights pointing down. And I looked at it and I was like, man, that's beautiful. What is that? And I realized that's the Penn State Stadium. And that's when I kind of realized, I was like, wow, like that's what I really enjoy. And that's what I want for Washington. Like, I want opposing teams, when they come into D.C., they come in seeing RFK. They see the monument behind it. They see the whole city all together. When you come into Landover, obviously the one side of it is you're just driving into a neighborhood. The other side of it is you're just getting right off of 495, right? Making a left on a Stadium Drive, dealership right there. But like, you don't get that same feeling, that same vision of like, oh, like this is huge. What really entails here? And ultimately, if you're going to be called the Washington Commanders, you want to be represented in Washington. And I think the one aspect of this that Arch and I actually agree a lot on is that they have the land of Virginia, right? They have, obviously, Northwest Stadium right now, and then they want to possibly get into D.C. There is a good chance, a good way that you can be able to make sure everybody is happy. You can sell off Ashburn for a data center like Arch believes. You can then take Northwest Stadium and make that your practice facility. So that way, Maryland is somewhat happy to say you're still somewhat represented. And, you know, we like to see Wes Moore show up to a training camp with his Commanders jersey on, but also was up at the Ravens wearing his Ravens jersey. And so it is funny to see that happen. So like everybody would be leaving the situation happy, so to speak. And now we are joined by our next guest. Recently, going to be getting married here soon. Got engaged not too long ago. Which congratulations, Ryan. How you doing, man? Thanks for joining us.
Appreciate, absolutely appreciate that, Kyle. Appreciate that, man.
Of course, dude. And look, it's the bye week, Ryan, and the title of this episode is the bye week briefing. And so, given up, obviously, this being a late bye, it's kind of a almost towards the end of the season. But give me your status report on Jayden Daniels. Let's just be honest with how we went into the season and how it could possibly pan out and the way that it did. What were your expectations then, and what are they like now?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be the first to say, Kyle, I entered the year tempered a little bit on Jayden Daniels because, for me last year, I did have Drake May in front of him. I did have Caleb Williams in front of him. I'm not afraid to admit that. You got to stand on those types of things. And I've just been super impressed with what number five has been able to do in this offense. And I think the biggest thing is he's only got Terry McLaurin on the outside. And you could really consider Zach Ertz an over the hill type of veteran where his best days at the position are behind him.
He's the second receiving leader on the team right now.
Exactly, exactly. So he is masking, Kyle, some of those inefficiencies on offense. And I've just been so impressed because I think looking at it now, where basically his regular season slate in his rookie year is over, right? With such a late bye. And I'm excited to see these next few weeks and creeping into the playoffs. But this is really the worst probably we're ever going to see Jayden Daniels because he is a rookie. He is only going to continue to evolve and master his craft and all the things we heard in the pre-draft process down at LSU and now this year with how he just comes into work every single day, knows the grindstone and executes and just studies his backside off. Those are things that are going to translate down the road where he gets older and older and older, and he's not going to have the same type of athleticism and juice potentially when he's 29, 30. Hopefully he's here that long than he is right now. So I just, from a fundamental perspective, Kyle, extremely impressed with what he's been able to do from the shoulders up, while looking at things mentally before he's ever showcased the immense arm talent and, of course, the dynamic ability that he's shown with his legs.
And for me, Ryan, one of the more, I'm not going to say surprising, but I've been more impressed with Jayden because obviously he was getting a lot of run in the middle to early this season, just nationally, locally, talking about how great was and doing. But it wasn't like he was causing a stir with the staff or the team because he wasn't getting all those touchdowns, right? He has 15 touchdowns, 6 interceptions, but Brian Robinson was getting a hefty amount of those touchdowns. Same with Austin Eckler. They were running the ball a lot. He is a very humble young man in the sense that he wasn't causing a big stir about that. And that's what was so impressive to me personally, because a lot of people in that position, when they're getting fluffed up like that, they could start getting big about themselves in an ego kind of way. And it didn't seem like that's what it was for Jayden. He much more said, yeah, they're talking good about me now, but if I start to play poorly, they're going to be changing that tune very, very quickly. But Ryan, my next question for you, what has been the most surprising aspect in the whole team looking at looking glass type of way? The offense or defense? Because right now, the defense, they're 28th in red zone conversion percentage, they're 16th in points per game, 27th in rushing, 5th in passing, 23rd in third downs, and 17th in sacks.
I'm going to say Dante Fowler
Okay.
up front. He's been extremely surprising for me. And I think the biggest thing with him is Joe Witt, Dan Quinn identifying what
Yep.
they had with him in Dallas and a guy that can come in and see what you got, really on a prove it type of deal here in DC, to where I know you've heard it also, Kyle, where he's had more sacks than Chase Young, Montez Sweat combined, all that good stuff this year. And that's good stuff. But I think still with this defense, and it really showed up Steelers game, but you lost by one. The Eagles game, you still had a shot with 12 minutes left. Those were tight ball games, but you see a little bit, even in the Titans game, where there are still holes in this roster. And what's so funny hearing from other national media as well is to where Washington post Dallas was a fluke. But really, for us that really follow this team in the nitty gritty, understand that it's not a fluke. It's a team that's accelerated their retooling, as Dan Quinn called it this year. And that team still, as we sit here right now on their bye week, that has absolutely nothing to lose. And when you look around the rest of the NFC, the Packers, the Vikings, the Eagles, the teams at the top, that are currently in their windows with everything to lose, and the Commanders are 8-5 against good ball clubs that they've competed with all year long. It's just been impressive. And I think main thing is there's still roster holes, but this defense, the edge group has really shown up at times this year for me. And you just got to tip your cap to everybody involved because, again, this is 2024 and you're laying the foundation of what's to come.
Yeah, even in their losses, Ryan, like
Yeah.
Pittsburgh, the Eagles, even going to the Ravens, they were in those games. It wasn't like they
Yeah.
were getting blown out. And I would much more say the Dallas game itself was a fluke, given with how they usually typically play, right? And so that was the fluke, not what happened post. And
Yeah.
so let people talk, man. They're
Right.
always going to. But that being said, who do you think is going to be the unsung hero for the last four stretch of games?
Oh man, I feel like I've talked about this young man a lot, but I feel like it has to be Mike Sanders still.
Okay,
Considering what they've asked him to do as a core contributor already for this defense, to where draft him to play nickel. Now he's outside. He's bouncing inside outside. He's covering Devonta Smith. He's been covering AJ Brown. He shut down guys last week, Calvin Ridley. Those guys were limited in that ball game. Now, I will say the touchdown against Nick Westbrook-Akine, I think got a little lazy in his technique a little bit. He's a better player than that, but he's a rookie. And this is a kid that was drafted to play inside. Now, is he the future on the outside, Kyle, opposite of Marshawn Lattimore? I don't know. I think they're going to add some
fair.
more pieces, free agency, trades, draft in this year's class. But I think the unsung hero, if they really want to reach their potential, taking the ball away and giving it back to Jayden Daniels in this offense in certain scenarios as we get later in this year, it's going to be Mike Sanders still. Because again, if he lives on the opposite side of Lattimore and he's on the football field, whether he's 100% or not, Mike Sanders still will be tested.
my man. Next question for you, sir. Offensively, who has been the biggest surprise? Obviously, you could point to Jayden Daniels. We already kind of talked about it. But besides Jayden,
I've been really impressed with Brandon Coleman. I really enjoyed watching him at TCU. Loved watching him live at the Senior Bowl. It's always fun getting live eyes on these guys after watching them for years on tape and just seeing how they operate up close in person, how they look in pads, how they move. But for Brandon to come in and rotate with Cornelius early on, then working to a starting role, and a lot of times, he's not getting a ton of help. There's been moments where, of course, the Cincinnati game or the Giants game, the Eagles game, where he has help, and that's smart to do that with RBs, Ben Sinnott, the other tight ends in that class, or John Bates as well in the group. But Brandon Coleman, as far as to get a quarterback like Jayden Daniels and then a potential franchise guy on day two as well to protect his blind side for potentially the next decade. He's been extremely impressive and a great story as well for someone that even entered the process with that bum ankle and even went down to Mobile and competed his tail off against a lot of good players as well. And that told me a lot about Brandon and probably told a lot to Adam Peters as well as far as what type of young man they're going to get along their front five for the future.
my man. And then obviously the next four games are going to be huge.
Yeah.
Washington did the best thing possible by getting that win, a confidence building win against Tennessee heading into the bye week. But it isn't going to be easy these last four games heading into the possibly the playoffs if they do win some games there. So what do you expect for their record to be for these next four games? I personally will always say you take it 1 week at a time, right? But we sitting in chairs just as a fan and evaluators, how do you see it playing out?
I think they have a very good chance to win all four, Kyle. I really do. When you look at divisional games, no matter what, no matter where, you're always probably going to go 500, right? So you get Dallas and Philly, you get those games back. That's 2-0. And I do think they're a better team and they're executing better than what Atlanta's doing and what New Orleans is doing. So I think they do have a chance to go 4-0. Again, this is a team that has absolutely nothing to lose here in 2024. But I think at worst, I think you go 3-1. Let's just say they lose to Philly at home. Going to be a tough ball game. But let's just say 3-1 right now. But I really do think they have a shot to really turn this thing around post-bye, come in with just a newfound fire, ready to prove people wrong nationally inside the division where nobody's given them a shot behind Philadelphia. And I still have some questions about Philadelphia as well, Kyle. I know they're playing good defensive ball, but Saquon Barkley, that you take, I don't want to play hypotheticals and say you just take Saquon off a roster,
You're right.
but Jalen Hurts, the Kellen Moore offense, it didn't work in Dallas. It didn't work in LA with Justin Herbert. I've seen a lot of regression from Jalen Hurts this year through the air. And I think if teams are able to stack the box a little bit and limit, you're not going to stop Saquon, limit him, keep her under 80 yards, and force Jalen Hurts to beat teams, I think a lot of teams are going to, including Washington, are going to have a shot in this latter half of the year.
One of the staggering things, I was looking up like quarterback stats and where Jayden ranked nationally right now. And the one staggering thing was the sack yardage, where like Jalen has over 200 of sack yardage, which just screams to you that he's just running backwards trying to avoid things and just can't get away from anybody. But I thought that was insane. But to wrap this up, Ryan, only a couple more questions for you, sir. That being said, we saw the game plan against Tennessee in the 3-game stretch. What do you think the game plan should be offensively and defensively heading into these 4 games?
I think it's easy to say just give Jayden Daniels more opportunities, Kyle, but that's where I'm at right now. Because every time you give Jayden Daniels the ball and allow him to open it up early, like we saw Terry get really involved early on against Tennessee, he's proving no matter who's out there to just pump him with targets accurately, all 3 levels. And also, when teams are going to try to stack the box against Jayden, against Brian Robinson, you've seen what Jeremy McNichols or Chris Rodriguez running hard as that 3, 4, 5-headed backfield. I think the ability for Jayden Daniels, just give him the ball, allow him to make plays inside the red zone as well, where he is unbelievable with his legs. He is an unbelievable dynamic weapon inside that 15 to 10-yard range when you get closer to that front zone, the end zone. Is absolutely sensational to watch. So on offense, give the ball to Jayden Daniels more. And I don't want to say more, just give more opportunities to make plays downfield. And then on defense, I think a little bit less cover one. I don't like the corners right now on the outside that you're playing with as far as consistently in man. I do want to see a little more too high looks. Maybe it's a Quan Martin and a Percy Butler. You want to be unique with Jeremy Chin. I'm not sure there. Marshawn will help. That's the biggest thing right now for this defense. Get Marshawn Lattimore on the field. He will help out all 3 levels of this defense.
And hopefully we can get Frankie Louvu and Dante Fowler up to double-digit sacks by the end of this season.
Great.
That would be great to be able to see. Next question I have for you, obviously, are huge into the draft. And obviously it's way too early. We're not looking at the draft. But just speaking of right now, where we are in Week 14, we have a pretty good idea of where this football team is, what we do have currently. What would you say is Washington's top 3 needs?
Yeah, I think it's right now. I would probably say wide receiver 2 is near the top there for me. But they need another corner, a perimeter guy, and they also need another edge rusher. Now, I will say this: their running back spot is interesting, but they do not need to go in round 1 and grab a running back. This is, and I want to make this perfectly clear, Kyle. There are upwards of 40 to 50 running backs in this class that have draftable grades. I've heard from teams.
Wow.
Every board is different. There are guys everywhere. And I'll give you a little story earlier on in the fall when Northern Illinois played at Notre Dame, and I was talking to a scout from the NFC East, not in Washington, another NFC East scout, and he was in South Bend. That game, Northern Illinois went in and beat Notre Dame, if you guys remember, early on in the year. And I was talking about Riley Mills from Notre Dame, Xavier Watts, the safety, who's outstanding, Benjamin Morrison on the outside is going to be drafted high. But the scout wasn't talking about those guys. He was talking about the running back, Ontario Brown from Northern Illinois. He said he's the best player on the field right now. So that just tells you the type of ball players at the running back position where they are everywhere. You know, your Ashton Genties of the world, Amarian Hamptons of the world. But there's so much depth at this running back class where I know there's been a little bit of buzz as far as does Washington go Ashton Genty potentially in the top 20 picks. I don't think they need to do that right now, considering the other holes that I just mentioned and considering how historic, Kyle, this class is going to be at the running back spot.
You think somebody like Ryan Williams would possibly be available in mid to late first?
Ryan Williams?
Oh, no. What, am I getting his name wrong? The Alabama wide receiver.
The 17-year-old?
I believe so. Is
He's
he
only a
not
true
drafted?
freshman.
He's
He's
a
only
true
a true
freshman?
freshman. He's a true freshman.
Oh my goodness. I gotta fresh
Yeah.
up on my stuff, Ryan. My goodness.
Oh,
I'm
all
all over
good.
the place. But
Busy guy, yeah.
my last question for you. Now that we are where we are, besides Jayden Daniels,
Yeah.
who is the MVP of this team?
Oh, man. I'm going to say Frankie Louvu. Man, what an addition he's been in the middle of this defense. You know, bounced around, started out with the Jets as a UDFA, obviously spent time in Carolina, but what a hell of a ball player. You know, and you want to talk about getting a young man in the building where we've heard all off season where Dan Quinn and Joe Witt talked about we're going to be physical, aggressive, play behind our pads, hair on fire. That is Frankie Louvu every single damn week and every day in practice. And that's going to be someone. I don't know how long Bobby Wagner will be in town. I think he could play another year or potentially 2 in the middle of this defense. But Frankie, his ability to play off ball backer, 2-point stance outside an edge, put his hand in the dirt and get after the quarterback as well. He's just been absolutely sensational. And for me, he's played at an all-pro level. He deserves to be a Pro Bowler this year. Early on in the year, I know I tried to get some talk going for Defensive Player of the Year, but probably not going to be in that conversation for people that don't watch Washington out there. But Frankie Louvu, I cannot say enough good things for him. Unbelievable leader on and off the field, and a player that I hope deserves his recognition as a first team All Pro this year because he's been sensational.
I wholeheartedly agree. He really does bring the energy to the team, and it's not just based on the haka, but it shows on defense whenever he's flying around and playing with that energy and that tenacity. Everyone else just like picks up on it. Just real quick, Jayden Daniels was the Offensive Rookie of the Year. How important do you think that award is for Jayden to get, just in the whole grand scheme of things? And how likely is it that he's going to be able to snatch that away?
Yeah, I think well, first off, good for Bo Nix. I think he's someone that for me personally, I was a little higher on in last year's class.
I will say in that pre-draft process, I said that he was he matched up with Sean Payton so freaking well in that whole slant concept, and that was a great relationship before they even drafted him. And the fact that he did go to him, that credit to both of them because they really made it work.
Absolutely. And there's not a lot of guys in Denver that he's throwing to, right? It's Troy Franklin, it's Cortland Sutton. They traded Jerry Jeudy, and we saw what happened on Monday night. Jerry coming back into Denver and lighting them up a little bit. But just good for Bo Nix as a mature, experienced quarterback that doesn't have a super sexy skill set, but he's someone that just understands how to win at the position. But for Jayden Daniels, I think winning the award is not only going to be big for him, I do think he does win it. I think he's going to really even turn it on even more here these next few weeks as he wants to win that type of award. But I even think it's moving towards the future where guys want to come in and play for a guy like Jayden Daniels.
Right.
So getting that award, we haven't really seen that type of award since RG3 won it right back in 2012. There's never been those types of accolades for guys out of Washington really since really the Trent Williams days, right? So he's consistent Pro Bowl, Pro Bowl, Pro Bowl year after year. So I think Jayden does get it. It's definitely a two-man race between him, Bo Nix, and I will say this though, Brock Bowers with Las Vegas also deserves some notoriety because what he's doing is pretty unbelievable as well.
It almost makes you forget about Michael Mayer coming out of Notre Dame, where they have him on the same squad of what Brock Bowers has done and really outshined him. Ryan, please forgive my question about the Alabama wide receiver. I got to freshen up, man.
He's a stud. He's a stud.
Before you get out of here, I just want to say congratulations, of course, on your engagement. But before you get out of here, I'd like to plug your social media handle and your show, brother.
Yeah, of course. My show, Commanding the Huddle, comes out 2 times a week during the season. We'll have a podcast out tomorrow, Thursday, December 5th. We're talking all things NFL draft, names to know, sleepers, positions of need that we talked about earlier with Kyle, with offense, defensive side of the ball. We'll talk a little Senior Bowl as well. I'm on X_Ryan Fowler if you don't follow me there already, and all my work is at the Draft Network.
My man. Ryan, have a great, safe night. Stay warm, brother. It's a cold one out there.
It is. Always appreciate you, Kyle.
Thanks, Ryan. Bye. All right, everybody. We just spoke with the man, Mr. Ryan Fowler. Always appreciate his time. Blundered that one, boys, because I saw a highlight of him, and I was like, oh, my goodness, that's a true freshman, that Alabama wide receiver. So whenever he gets out, it's going to be insane. And obviously somebody like Travis Hunter is not going to be anywhere near where Washington is picking up at this point. But to wrap this up, boys, let's answer some fan questions that were submitted. First one, this one is by Andy Lockhart, who asks us, after hearing about Eckler's memory loss since his second concussion of the season, 1, do you think he returns this season? 2, do you think he ever returns to playing pro football? That was devastating to hear, that he even had some memory loss in his concussion in the Bengals game, and then to hear that he didn't remember anything from the Cowboys game when he got knocked out of that one, that's just devastating to hear about a guy, because that brings in that not the horrific, it's very the negative part of football, where obviously these guys are playing for a lot of money and everything, but it's one of those things where you don't want to have a guy long term in their life having to deal with the side effects of concussions, having the issues, the CTE possibly, and everything else. Like, you want a guy to be able to walk away from football and just to be himself, who he was playing football. You don't want to see him leave and be living almost in misery because of how he played football and what was played in it, which sucks. I'm not sure if, honestly, I'd be concerned if I was Austin Eckler about getting onto the field again this season. There's been different cases. I think everyone is unique. I think Arch explained that very well in our Discord, where There's some guys like Backstrom had some concussion issues playing pro hockey, and he was able to kind of get away from that at the end of his career. Whereas it's a very unique thing per guy. But this is much more so about Austin and what Austin feels is best for him. He's got a family. He's got a wife that he has to really take into consideration here and himself. And so I think this is Austin's decision to make. I'm not going to shoo Austin away if he wants to come back, right? It's not like an Alex Smith kind of situation where it's like we don't want to be the reason something horrifically goes wrong with you, but I don't want to limit a guy just based on that one injury. If you feel comfortable with going, if the doctors feel comfortable with you going, let's kick the tires, right? Like let's go. We're happy to have you back, but at the same breath, I want to force you out there just because we need you. What's more important is his long-term health, and I think everyone feels that way. Now playing pro football again, it's the same thing. I don't know what Austin wants to do. I don't know if he feels comfortable getting back onto the field. And as a former football player myself, you don't know when that last time you're going to step onto the field with your helmet on is. And some guys don't want to leave too early. Some guys do want to leave early before that ever happens. It sucks. I really feel for Austin Eckler. That was really tough to read because it sucks for Austin that happened to him. And I wish I could take it away from him. But at this point, do what's best for him. And whatever he feels is best, that's the way that you go. I don't want to get in the way of that as a fan and be selfish in a way of saying, I need you, we need you on the team. Like, no, dude, your health, your life is way more important. I know ball is life. I get it. I'm just saying your life is important. And I think Dan Quinn and company echo that sentiment, and they really do care about the guys. And so this is not something that we should be concerned with. It's much more about Austin and the medical professionals, what they believe. The next question we have is from Meest. Thanks, Meest. It's been a while, brother. Hope you had a great Thanksgiving. What's your opinion on the Commanders hiring Mark Klaus as new team president? He recently served as president and chief executive for Campbell's, Goldfish, Rowell, and Pepperidge Farm. Pepperidge Farm, remembers? I love it. Obviously, he's only going to be sticking to the business side of the operations, which is music to my ears. Music to my ears. This is somebody that obviously has been in charge of some massive corporate-style businesses. West Point graduate, was a helicopter pilot for 6 years. So that's somebody that you trust steering the ship, so to speak. And so that's why I love it. I think that I think he actually played basketball for Army at West Point as well. So obviously the basketball connections are there. You saw the picture on Twitter of him standing next to Josh Harris, and you could just see the discrepancy in their height. That's the type of guy you want being the president of your football team in the business side. Obviously, I'm going to love seeing Jayden Daniels in the new Campbell's Soup commercials. That's going to be fun. Going to be happy to see him in those. Hopefully, he's just not wearing a robe in front of a fireplace in a really odd and weird manner. But it's a great move for this organization, getting back to a professional sense. And I really am happy for the future of what we do have. Because obviously this guy has the pedigree. He has the reputation. He has really the stamina to be able to because being here in Washington, it's a different animal. And I think we all know that. And so somebody that is mentally tested, being a helicopter pilot, being a kind of huge corporate kind of entity boss, they kind of been around that block before. And so they have to be able to withstand some craziness. And I think this is the perfect kind of person that you'd want to bring in. Somebody that is obviously mentally tough just as much as they are physically. Thank you, Meest. Next question from Deluxe. What does someone who takes a season 1 week at a time do during the bye week? I'm struggling with that myself, sir, because it's hard. I've watched some film against what we did against the Titans. Obviously, I uploaded it on Twitter, so you guys can go check it out there. But ultimately, it's looking forward to what's going to go on against the Saints. Like when I was doing the writing down all the stats here before my son wrote on the paper today, looking down and trying to see where the Saints are, and it's hard because obviously that could change in a week of what they do this weekend. But ultimately, I think it's much more so about just enjoying your time day by day, just enjoying your time with your family, obviously at work and everything like that. Just making the most of it and understanding that there is no stress this week. Taking it one day at a time and just remembering. And the great thing about it is we just came off a win. So that's where it's kind of like, okay, we're good, fresh flowers, smelling it, feels awesome. That's what I would ultimately say. And I would say documentaries. I've been all over documentaries recently, especially like crime documentaries. I'm a sucker for those, but also like World War II documentaries. I'm getting back into it, man. Absolutely love it. I was telling Reed last night in Discord, he needs to read We Were Soldiers Once and Young. The Colonel actually gifted me that book that was signed by Eddie Gallagher, the author, who was there at the Battle of La Drang, one of the only civilian in the Vietnam conflict overall to get a medal, a combat medal, because of how crazy metal it was there. He actually had to do some damage, and it was a crazy time. It's an awesome book. I would recommend it to all of you, young men and women, to kind of learn about leadership from Colonel Hal Moore, who co-authored it with Eddie Gallagher. So that's something I would really advise for a Christmas gift if you guys are thinking about it. It's a really, really good book that displays maps, breaks down the battle to you, and it's something that you really learn a lot from in terms of the macrocosm of life and things to worry about and stress about. That book really puts it in perspective for you about everything. Next question from Deluxe. What games are you going to watch this week? Why did you have to ask me that question, Arch? Because I haven't looked even at it, because fantasy, this is coming down to playoffs. There's been a bunch of issues in our league. But I'll say, look, let me look it up right now. For this week, the games that I'm really paying attention to are the Packers and Lions. Obviously, the Lions are dealing with their own thing on Thursday night with injuries, because we need the Packers to lose some in order for Washington to bump up a seed, right? And that's probably my big eye point, because I would love to be able to face Seattle. Seattle, during the Snyder years, were really a thorn in our backside for playoffs. And that's one that I would feel personally vindicated with getting some revenge, so to speak. I'm not scared of the Eagles whatsoever. I just want some revenge in that breath. Another one that I'm really paying attention to is probably going to be, let me look at these. Seahawks and Cardinals. That's going to be a very good game. And then the Chargers and Chiefs as well. But I would say the Cardinals and the Seahawks, because of the playoff implications there themselves. But because that being an NFC West matchup, really interested, because one of my coworkers is actually a Seahawks fan, and he actually went to Seattle, saw them there, and then went to MetLife, came back to see them play the Giants. And I'm really invested to see how the Seahawks play, because they're like the one anomaly, like where Tariq Woolen has like completely just you've forgotten about what happened there. And then with Mike McDonald going there defensively, like, are they going to be able to get this thing under wraps and be able to solidify some things? And the Cardinals have been playing some good football recently. Obviously, Washington took them around back and handed them a lashing, but I think that Arizona is no joke. And if they can actually help us out a little bit, maybe Washington could bump up and get a good seed in this playoff. But that's going to wrap us up for this episode, boys. I appreciate you. I'm sorry I'm not feeling the best. I'm still getting over this dang cold. Trying my hardest to stay hydrated and rest up a little bit. But hope you guys have a great bye week for this bye week briefing. My name's Kyle. It's been an absolute pleasure. If you made it this far, you're a freaking champion. Please forgive me for that stupid question and my sickness. All right, everybody. I'm Kyle, and we'll see you guys again on Sunday. Washington football. Woo!
What's up, everyone? This is Kyle from the Burgundy Zone. We are releasing our own merch to support the show. If you want to rock the Burgundy Zone logo, or you want to see Reed's face on your shirt, we got it. We're starting with t-shirts, hoodies, and zip-up. So if you're a fan of the show, make sure you snag one before they are gone. Check out the link in our bio on Instagram, or you can find the link in the description of the video. Thanks again for all your support. Until next time.